trucks have been...
Hello, Eswatini. Hello, world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, depending on where in the world you are streaming from. Welcome to another episode right here on The Connect. We're coming at you live from Bab City, the cap city in the kingdom of Eswatini. It's another beautiful day out there, man. I just hope you guys are taking in the sun. There's a little bit of breeze. It's just a lovely day in Africa. And I'm here with my co-host, the ever so pretty Miss Shelley Shells. Hello.
Hello. I thought you were going to do your half-an-hour introduction.
It's okay. I
wasn't quite ready to come in there.
I was told we don't have time, so I was like, okay.
That's a good thing. Thanks for the message. Good morning. Welcome, guys. Thank you for tuning in. We do apologize for our late entry onto the waves. As you know, live TV always we're faced with some challenges, but we consistently want to overcome them. And so we've been option thinking behind the scenes, making sure that we come to you with a very, very important subject and interesting topic that we have today. So thank you for connecting. Please share this link. Tell your networks, hey guys, we are live. Come into the room and really engage with us today, because I'm sure you've got your own thoughts, you've got your own questions, and we always want to hear from you. Okay.
Absolutely. So go ahead and host watch parties. Make sure that you send comments, questions, queries. Whether you have us on WhatsApp, whether you have us on Facebook or YouTube, just go right ahead and join in on the conversation. Special shout out, of course, to Daniel Toro of DT Photography, who's making sure that we're coming at you live this morning from the Pacific Institute in Mbabane.
And of course, the dream team is not just DT. Hey, there's more people. You don't see them, but they are the dream team behind the scene, as we say. There's Pinky Nyondoro, and we're very happy to have in studio with us our colleagues. So there's Sue and Marisa, who are also here. Nice to have you. And obviously we're not alone, right here in the front.
Absolutely, absolutely. We got the man with the master plan. How's it, Dane?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, great stuff. Welcome to the show. All right. And we also do have a guest who will be joining us via Zoom. We're definitely smack bam in that time in our, lifetime where we can just actually hang around with people that are not here, but they're here, but they're not here, but they're here. I don't know if I'm making sense, but he's here, but he's not here. We've got Sir Lloyd joining us as well in the room, and we're going to be introducing, we're going to be bringing him in a couple of minutes. But for now, just to maybe touch base a little bit, Dane, what has been your lockdown sort of like chronicles? What's been going on in your world?
COVID chronicles.
Yeah, COVID chronicles.
What have been your COVID chronicles?
Yeah, wow. I don't know where the time has gone, to be honest.
Yeah.
And how we're suddenly in December.
Yeah.
Let's try again next year, I guess.
I like that.
Let's try again next year.
It's the main thing. It's been tumultuous. I think everyone, professionally, personally, emotionally, mentally, physically, it's been testing. But I think for those of us that work doing different things, especially in the creative sector, etc., you learn to adapt. And I think working in Eswatini, you're on your toes generally. But I think it's been quite a setback for everybody. So yeah, I mean, working in the environmental and climate sector, the problems haven't gone away. So, you kind of try and keep on top of things.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people needing a lot of assistance and time and effort. And you're constantly recalibrating yourself. So it's been testing, but a lot to be grateful for.
Yeah,
so
true. It's an overriding theme, hey? Even
Absolutely.
in the midst of all this confusion and uncertainty, there's definitely a very strong sense of gratitude. I was with a team yesterday in a room and I was like, okay, let's check in. And almost everybody in the room was just about, I just feel a whole lot of gratitude for just to be alive, to be here, to still be moving forward. So yeah, I think that's the theme for 2020 is gratitude, I think, as we end this year.
Yeah.
And whatever that year, hey, it hasn't been 12 months, it's sort of been something. A mix mash of something, but
a whole chapter.
Yeah, hey, it's very strange.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also recall another conversation. Somebody was just like saying maybe we should just be aware of the fact that this year was more about appreciating what we actually do have and what we've already experienced, more than it being about accumulating more stuff and more experiences. You know, it's just sort of like for us to pause and actually, you know, really just take stock and appreciate what we actually have so far. So, and I think I like that kind of thinking as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice.
Great stuff. Shells, where do we want to start? I know we've got like such a mammoth task ahead of us today.
I'm just looking in the room. Thank you very much for joining us. We've got Claudia, welcome. We've got other people also. Keep coming into the room, guys. Let us know where you're from and where you're joining us from, and just prepare your own questions and responses to what we're talking about. But ultimately, yes, today we're having a conversation. There's been talk in our midst, and I'm sure whether you've been in a WhatsApp group or not, internet, in the press, in our local press, talk about coal mining and this new project at Lubhuku, which is at Thamsanqa area, if you know Eswatini or not. And I think a lot of sort of emotions, perspectives, feelings, opinions around it. And what we wanted to do is kind of bring this topic to you and let's discuss it. Let's hear the two sides. Let's bring information to the table so we can all, from our own perspectives, also make informed decisions. And that's really what today is about. So thank you, Dane, for saying yes. Thank you, Lloyd, for agreeing. Lloyd, you're on Zoom, and I think what we'll do is intermittently bring you in on the conversation. And then, of course, as a reminder, all of you out there on your screens, on your phones, on your devices, connect with us. You've got your own opinions. You've got maybe stories. You've also got questions that you might want to ask our two guests today. Please feel welcome to do so. Okay. Yeah,
absolutely. So just to dive straight into it, we can all agree that Eswatini is too reliant on, energy imports, as it were, and we definitely do need a solution to take us further or to take us into the next step. Like, where do we go from here? What can we do as the Kingdom of Eswatini? And so we have explored different sort of like methods on how we can do that, and the one that seems to be prevailing in as far as the government is concerned is that of thermal power. And I think that's exactly what the bone of contention is here today. And to help us sort of like figure out or find out more about that is, like we already said, we've got Dane in the building, and I'll allow Shelley to introduce him. But we also do have a veteran in the gold mining industry, CEO and founder of Salamander, that is Lloyd Burrell, originally from an accounting and legal sector, and multidisciplinary skills such as process engineering, underground and surface mining. Previously the CEO of Agnes Mining and the director of ASICS listed Mantails Limited. Mr. Burrell is also also founded Stonewall Resources and was the CEO between 2010 and 2015. This guy has got a track record from here to Timbuktu, but basically great success in acquiring, restructuring, and recommissioning gold assets and restoring them to profitability.
And here with us in studio, we have Dane. Now, Dane is obviously not unknown to us in our Eswatini context. Dane Armstrong. Dane, I loved when I was printing this out, I was like, wow, there's so much I don't know about you. You're like this undercover, hey, operative.
We wear lots of hats, all of us.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just being involved. Obviously, Dane, at the moment, you're very much involved in Solidarity Eswatini, and which is a mutual aid volunteer action group assisting in the COVID-19 related community relief projects. Also in the Climate Coalition, Eswatini Climate Coalition, but you're not only involved with that, you've also been involved right through with the US Embassy in projects, Outreach, Yebo Art and Design, Guba Eswatini, and these are amazing organizations that do so much as far as sustainability in their different areas. And I love how you introduce yourself, a creative social entrepreneur that sees the potential in everything. So now potential obviously for us is a sweet spot word. We love that. It's just really great to have you, and we're very interested to hear from your side also on this topic. Obviously you have your blog up, and for those of you who will go and Google, you'll be able to get in touch with Dane on different social media as well, if you'd like to continue the conversation after this.
Absolutely. All right. So can we just go ahead and bring Lloyd in? Daniel Toro, are we ready to bring him in? Okay, not just yet. Okay, I'll get the cue from Daniel Toro, and then we'll bring Lloyd in. As in, are we ready to have a conversation with him? Okay, great stuff. Lloyd, hello, good morning, and welcome to the Connect.
Thank you for having me.
All right, great stuff. I think maybe let's just start by finding out what's going on in your world. What are your COVID chronicles? And then we'll dive into the topic of the day, just to get your energy. Where's your head? Where's your heart around this time that we're in right now?
Okay, personally, it's been fine. I've been very fortunate, and we've utilized the time to plan our road forward in terms of our mining operations. We are looking very closely at our big Cobolondo project, which you may have heard of, and very excited about that. Regrettably, though, living in South Africa, we're seeing some hard times coming, and that's been the tragedy of this, to see small business and your man on the street, the less wealthy, suffering, and that suffering is going to continue, I'm afraid, into next year. The prognosis is not very good. So personally, very blessed, but unfortunately, watching what's happening in South Africa and neighboring countries, not quite as pleasant, I'm afraid.
All right. Thank you so much, Lloyd, for just being vulnerable and letting us into your personal and professional space this morning. Shelley?
So I think, yeah, let's jump straight in, gentlemen, if you will. So ultimately, yes, like you say, there's probably hard times ahead, Lloyd. We see it on ourselves. We've seen how, and we are consistently talking about the radical changes that are happening, but also this real need. When we think power, obviously we are very reliant on power coming in from Eskom. That word seems to be a hashtag and has been going on for a long time. We obviously are aware that we potentially are coming to the end of some sort of relationship with buying power in from South Africa. What does this mean for us locally? So ultimately, we understand that we need to reduce our reliance on this imported power.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree on that. The next stage, though, is to know, so what's next? What's the next option we have? What's the how behind that? What does that look like? What is the potential in our space to generate our own power as Eswatini? And perhaps that's where we really need to go. So we obviously understand that there's been this proposed Lubhuku coal power plant that's been set up, right? Mm-hmm. And supposedly this is the response or the answer to us generating our own power. Okay. There is a price tag to this, and as we read through the different, write-ups, we're talking about 12 billion coal thermal power plant, okay, and obviously other infrastructure that needs to be considered. But there are many different parts to this, and there's obviously documentation that has come out of Eswatini as part of the Energy Master Plan 2020-2034 that was launched in 2018. So what does this power plant really mean for us? Yes, it's generating power, but there are many different aspects to it. And what are some of those things that we need to consider, Dane, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I mean, there's so many different angles to unpack, and my background is in climate change science, adaptation, mitigation, and economics. Not necessarily an energy expert in terms of every single nitty-gritty, but I do know where we shouldn't go, and coal is definitely the wrong direction from almost every point of view. So I think, like you said, we've all gotten to the point where we understand we need energy independence in Eswatini. And my background is more in food, and we have the same problem with food here. You know, we're importing almost 90% of our food from South Africa. Energy, it's about 70% from South Africa and Mozambique. This needs to be flipped. You know, we're not talking about 100% independence on both these counts, right? We do need to work together with our regional partners and things, but we need to flip those statistics on their head. And with energy, there is a kind of time frame to that, and it's a bit unclear, but basically by 2025 we need to be reworking our agreements with Eskom, and anyway with the situation that it's in, it's a good idea to be doing that. And like you said, we did create an energy master plan, and I'd like to talk on that a bit later, where we as government mapped out all of these potential solutions, and we seem to have settled on this one. It's not just coal, there is solar and biomass, but they're about 1/10 of the investment and energy provision as the coal is. So it's by far the lion's share of what our plan is. And it just comes with a whole string of other costs and externalities attached to it, which we really need to consider before we end up shooting ourselves in the foot here and not rush into this. I mean, we won't anyway, because this is a huge undertaking. It's not like you just suddenly have a coal power plant up and running, or the mining or the import that's needed to fuel such a thing. So what we're hoping with all this kind of public advocacy and dialogue is to really bring it to the table so that people know what they're in for, whether you're a community resident in Lubhuku or the Lubombos, or you're just a person on the street wondering where their energy comes from or could come from. That conversation needs to be had in the public sphere, because I, as a citizen, want to have a choice in the say as where the energy comes from that I'm purchasing, that I'm buying. I don't want every time I switch on a light to be thinking about the fact that we're contributing to problems down the line, which we already are. Most of our energy is coming from Eskom, which is coal powered. So let's move away from that. And in the articles we've published, which speak to the points that have come out in the first scoping assessment that was done by independent environmental assessors, they themselves bring out the risks in this project. All we're doing is picking them apart and trying to help make them more accessible to the general public. There's nothing new we're talking about. There's no hidden secret to all of this. The threat to biodiversity in the region, the threat to air quality, the threat to the communities that stay there is a huge deal. But on top of that, you know, I also have a background in economics, and to me it doesn't make economic sense to be doing this. The world is moving away from fossil fuels. You know, South Africa have managed to shut down this second or third proposed coal power plant in the last few months. Ghana has done the same. There are countries around the world, whether it's Costa Rica, the Gambia, Tasmania, Germany, Denmark, moving towards 100% renewable energy. Why can't we be doing the same? I think if we were in a position where we had a coal power plant and we were thinking how quickly we can wrap it up, that's fine. Let's keep using it. You don't want to risk jobs and income, but because we haven't yet got that in motion, let's not set ourselves down a path of finding ourselves 10 years down the line and actually it's financially unfeasible to keep digging this out, to keep burning it. We're creating and upskilling jobs in a sector that's dying. We're going to have to reimagine what those people's work and livelihood will look like when we inevitably move away from this. So, you know, even without all the environmental and social costs, if you just want to look at this from an economic perspective and job creation, it doesn't make sense. All of the proposed things in here are estimating, based on assumptions that coal price remains the same for 25 years, for 15 years, that carbon taxes aren't introduced, that financiers want to keep on doing this. Those are all huge assumptions when the world is already moving away from this, and we end up finding ourselves with a stranded asset kind of the dirtiest white elephant that we've yet to create in the country. You know, and we've got a few white elephants.
We have.
So let's, you know, if we want to build things, really, let's think carefully here. It's not just about construction jobs.
Thanks, Dane. Let's bring you in, Lloyd. So from your perspective, ultimately, like we opened up with the segment, we understand that we need to sort of reduce our reliance. In this Eswatini Energy Master Plan, which I'm sure you've had eyes on, there are many different options that were presented, I believe almost 10, yet we seem to have, you know, galvanized behind this or decided to go with the one that is coal. And obviously just in response to what's been to what Dane has been sharing with us, what's your position on this from your perspective?
Right, well, fundamentally, I do not believe Eswatini has a choice. I believe it has to proceed with this coal-fired power station. Gremlins, warts and all. Now, before I entered the gold mining industry, and it seems like a lifetime ago, in the early 2000s, I was actually the Southern African representative of Sonatrach, which is the world's second largest natural gas provider, the Algerian equivalent of Sasol, if you like. And we were looking at the development of the Ibubesi and the Kudu gas fields of the West Coast with the view to providing natural gas to provide a base load to the Western Cape and to keep Moss gas going. Now, for various political reasons, it didn't proceed, but fundamentally, Eskom was the blocker there. Eskom said, we've got this, we've got energy sorted, and we all know what's happened. So your first strategic decision is whether or not you can rely on Eskom to provide you with power. And I'll make a prediction that in 2024-25, when your agreements are renegotiated, you can expect a steep increase in the price. And I'm not talking 5% or 10%. And regrettably, because you don't have any other options, you'll be forced to take whatever Eskom dish out. And you'll have to assess for yourself which constituents Eskom will serve first. And I can predict that your prices will go up dramatically. That's the first point. The second point is that Eskom has an unstable platform, very unstable. We got to know those power plants pretty well. And even 20 years ago, they were nearing end of life. With the lack of maintenance, the platform you can accept is pretty unstable. And what we're predicting is that in the winter to come in 2021, rolling, let's call them blackouts or load shedding, whatever you want to call it, will become the order of the day. Now, what that has is that means that ordinary business, hospitals, manufacturers have to then move over to diesel-generated power of their own. Hugely expensive, very polluted. So from a strategic perspective, Eswatini, I concur, needs energy independence. And time, I believe, is also running out. That's the first issue. When we were looking at all of these alternative energies, and please understand that one of the businesses many years ago I invested in was solar water heating. I'm a great believer in alternate energy. I believe that every household should have solar panels, have solar water heating. We should be looking at electric cars, not to power off Eskom, but your solar panels at home, put the energy into a battery during the day, and at night bring your solar power or your electrical car and plug it in and recharge for the next day. That's why Tesla is doing so well, because that is the way of the future. But what differentiates those is that the energy can be stored. And that is the difficulty with alternate energy. There's no way to store bulk. You cannot store a base load. And the difficulty with alternate energy, it cannot provide Eswatini with the base load. So that means on a cloudy day, when there's no sun, everything dies. Your grid switches off, you shed. At night, when there's no sun and there's no wind, same thing happens. You need a base load. You cannot build an industrial base of any fashion without a base load. Now, what are your options? You can get natural gas from Mozambique, but you're putting your future in the hands of a country which at the moment is under threat from ISIS. Whichever way you look at it, whether it's South Africa or Mozambique or imported coal, you have to look inward. And the only alternative that Eswatini has is coal. Now, 300 megawatts of coal for the next 30 years will guarantee financial freedom for Eswatini. It is that fundamental. You cannot have farms, small industries, hospitals being expected to shut down and switch off when there's no power. It'll break your economy, and it will effectively inhibit. You were talking about the agricultural side of it. Well, farms need continual power. You can't run a farm, where you processing. And I know very little about farming, but I do know from our various projects, you need continual power. And the other thing that you need power for is your mining, your future mining industry, gold mining. None of that can exist without a base load. So whilst I'm a great believer in alternate energies, you simply don't have enough. You don't have enough water, you don't have enough sun, and you don't have the storage capacity in order to do it. Now, what Dane was talking about was the negative side of coal mining, and I'll deal with that in due course. But fundamentally, that, I believe, is the only option Eswatini has, which is to build this power plant.
Thanks, Lloyd. Obviously, like we said, there were obviously many options that were discussed in this document, and like you say, there's obviously issues of storage of this energy, etc. When we talk financial freedom, and maybe let's get back to that, because what a lot of the actual report deals with is many different issues. Let's come to this. So we understand financial freedom, that is, we're not relying on Mozambique or South Africa, and we understand those risks. But we also are having this assumption that this whole power plant is going to reduce poverty by increasing employment opportunity and being inclusive of vulnerable populations, right? Is that in fact true? But we also maybe just need to, for the purposes of all of us to understand, when we say base load, you've used this word a few times. When we say base load, what are we referring to when we say base load? Just to understand it a bit. Dane, I don't know if you want to come in on the base load question, or...
I'm happy to.
Yeah? What is base load?
So the base load power is basically, as best that I understand it, is what we're going to need fundamentally to power everything. The question of when, the sort of criticism of renewable energy is that it's intermittent. So when it goes away, when it comes, etc. What is the core that is not intermittent, that is always there, which is why coal has been such an incredible energy source, to be honest. If you take away all of its externalities, it is really a magic thing. It's pure energy, and it's been one of the cheapest forms of, it's why we've industrialized so quickly around the world, because it gives a strong, cheap, reliable, constant base load of energy, and that's undeniable, right? It's just we also see at what cost that's come at. And I think we've gotten used to, I don't know, a good analogy basically with coal is that, you turned 18 and you got a credit card and you went on a spending spree, and now you've got to pay the bills because it's catching up with you. All of that, and the interest that you got to pay on that, the environmental and health and social costs are there. There is a whole kind of question that we need to actually rein in some of our expectations of energy use. We can't keep growing in the rate that we have been doing and expect things to remain the same. Okay, so we do have to also fundamentally have a paradigm shift at how we think about energy and energy use, and not just keep looking for that base load. Because I agree that it's probably one of the easiest, quickest solutions to kind of jump to, but really it just doesn't make sense anymore. I'm totally coming at this from a climate change perspective, because this is the decade at which we have to address climate change. We can't stop it, it's in motion, it's just how bad and severe it's going to be. And everyone from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to the UN, etc., is issuing statements: do not create new fossil fuel infrastructure projects. Okay, that is difficult for the third world, the global south, to accept, because we've seen the global north, the west, take this on and develop quickly using this, and now we're being told not to. So there are a lot of funding mechanisms in place to assist countries like us to not have to go that route, because we're not just polluting our own backyard, we're also contributing to the global problem out there. So there are countries that have put forward cases saying, we have this coal or oil reserve, we don't want to burn it, but we want to develop help us find alternative solutions here. So this is really what makes this a complicated and difficult topic, is that if you want to just approach it from an industrial energy perspective, you can just crunch the numbers, and that's seemingly what government has done, and it makes sense.
But
if you want to apply true cost economics to this and all the health implications, death, environmental and ecosystem service costs, it just doesn't make sense. Is it worth pursuing that? And also, at this point, things change so quickly every year.
Yeah.
You know, from when Lloyd was perhaps investing and looking at these solutions, things have changed enormously, and they continue to every year. You know, kind of Moore's law of processing power and cost doubling and halving at the same time applies to this to the renewable energy sphere. And there's a growing fallacy around this, like, baseload assumption, and that renewables cannot provide baseload, and that they cannot provide peak load energy, which is those hours at the beginning and the end of the day when we use most of our energy. And it's now cheaper in a lot of countries, including South Africa, to start investing in renewable energy. And the infrastructure and the energy supply is becoming more and more guaranteed, basically. So all we're talking about here is 12 billion emalangeni. If you want to apply that, we need less to get the same amount of power reliably from a mixed bag. I would not say we can only get all of that power from just solar, just wind. We've already got hydro in place. We're putting up biomass. All those things together will provide us the base load. And energy storage is purely just a kind of, once we apply ourselves to it and you apply the money to it, it's there. The technology exists, and within 5 years we could set up an incredible system that powers our needs and kind of reins us in a little bit, saying, well, you know, this is how much energy we're going to create, not this much.
All right. So this is actually very interesting, because now it's definitely like that conversation against the effects of pollution versus profits, and saving lives versus saving livelihoods. And like you're saying, we're not just looking at it from a now time and space, we're also looking at it from tomorrow and the future generations and all of that. And that's why this makes it a very difficult conversation, because yes, obviously the people that are, you know, sort of like in power are looking at, you know, self-preservation, me now, but what about tomorrow? All right. So in the room, we also do have Muzi, Mdeni, Lindelwa, Andrew, Nicholas, Bridget, Yael, Sean, hi Sean, and Mandla. And we do have a couple of comments that have come in. Claudia says, getting electricity from one of the most polluting and outdated ways of generating power is such a drawback for a country that should aim to clean resources of power and sustainability. And then Yael says, good morning. Was wind energy ever considered in Eswatini? Bridget says, good question, Yael. Seems to be used in many other countries around the world. What about hydroelectric? Can't we do more of this? Maybe Lloyd, let's just go back to something that Dane sort of like ended with right now. You said the coal as a source of energy is Eswatini's best option right now. But what about the mixed bag option? Is that something we could possibly look into?
Okay, coal is not the best option. It's the only option for your base load. Now, your base load, and Dane did explain it, but let me just say what it is. At 9 o'clock at night, when your hospitals need power, that's your base load. There's no solar coming in at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night. Your base load is what you need for continual operations. So the sawmill that's still operating at 2 o'clock in the morning, that is your base load, which is not far off, of 250 MVA in any event, because effectively your requirement, particularly when you hit peak load problems, and that's what's happened in South Africa. The amount of power that's being drawn is actually not sufficiently catered for by the power stations, because so many of them are under care and maintenance or being repaired. So effectively what happens, if you don't have a base load, you don't have an economy. Let's be absolutely clear on that. You've seen, and I need to just emphasize this, because people look across the border, and I travel around Southern Africa extensively, is that you look across the border and you see this mighty country next to you with all of this power. That's not the case anymore. In 1997, South Africa was the world's largest gold producer with 65 mines producing 500 tons of gold a year. Eskom saw this as the perfect opportunity to start to strip cash from the gold mines. More and more closed down. The number one reason for gold mines closing down in South Africa is because of a lack of cheap energy. As energy got more and more expensive. So, Dane, you point out I was in the energy industry 20 years ago, but I can assure you, in the opening of a mine that we're busy looking at, the provision of energy is our number one. I'm spending more time analyzing our energy options than I think even on the resource. So fundamentally, if you do not get your base, your energy mix right, your industries will suffer. Now, the question is, can alternate energies replace that? So you've got the Magugu Dam, which will give you, I don't know, if the rains are good, maybe 20 or 30 MVA. You've got solar, which could probably give you about another 100 or 150. Up in the highlands, the solar insulation rates are not great. They're not bad. But in winter, they're actually pretty low. Now, what happens when you go home after work on a winter's day? You start cooking, you bath the kids, you do all of that, and suddenly the energy spikes right as the sun is setting. So where does that energy come from? Or you switch off 150,000 households, which is what's been happening in South Africa. So fundamentally, you can get a significant amount of energy from your alternate energy sources, but it's variable and it's unreliable. So what's going to give you that base load when that is not producing? Now, the big problem that has bedeviled these schemes in South Africa is that you're paying, they become fairly cost effective, but Eskom has to pay for the alternate energy for the wind farm or the solar farm, but they still expected to keep their baseload power stations going. So in effect, you've got this double whammy of costs that's being put onto the consumer, because Eskom still have to keep their coal-fired power stations going, because if the wind stops or the sun doesn't shine, which happens quite a lot, then someone still has to provide the power. Now, when I say there's no option, a mixed bag, of course, it would be marvelous to have alternate energy, and you can get very clever with coal-fired power stations. For example, I see the Lubhuku power station envisages one boiler. I don't think that's smart. I think there should be 5 or 6 50 MVA boilers so that you can power them down. You can use biomass in those same boilers. Remember, biomass also emits a great deal of carbon dioxide. So effectively, if the coal-fired power station is smart and goes to supercritical status, which is enhanced technology to improve the production and reduce the emissions, you use basically, and I had to go and research it again because it's been some time since I looked at it, but wet flue gas desulfurization has resulted in some incredibly successful extraction of the carbon dioxide and the sulfur dioxide from the emissions. So what my suggestion would be is focus on getting as much energy as you can from these alternate energy sources. Those initiatives are applauded, they should be continued with, they should be encouraged, and they should be financed. But you need to focus on a more efficient baseload production with multiple units, and secondly, to make sure that your wet flue gas separation or desulfurization is world class. Now that's expensive. It's going to add an extra 2 billion to the cost, but I can tell you it is worth every single cent. And provided the environmentalists, such as Dane, are making sure that the emissions are controlled and that the deposition of the waste is properly managed, for example, with lined beds, you won't have as much of a problem as you've seen in Witbank, which I agree is an abomination. But remember, those were designed and built 60, 70 years ago. They've long since reached their sell-by date, and we've kept them going because South Africa hasn't upgraded the system. But essentially, no matter how I would like to see alternate energies in place. It is not feasible. And if you have an inexpensive baseload, which is environmentally as friendly and as controlled as possible, then you can start to attract more inward investment into agriculture. You're not going to replace your agricultural sector if you're expecting all of those farmers to go completely solar. Simply put, I do not believe Eswatini has a choice. To achieve energy independence, it is going to have to embark on this coal-fired power station. Bring in all the alternate energies by all means. Absolutely applaud those, but make sure that the rehabilitation and the environmental factors which are applied to the station are world-class. And there are plants that are being built in China, which, by the way, is building another 150 coal-fired power stations as we speak. If you look at the effort that's been put in by certain German companies and Chinese companies to reduce the emissions, I think that would put you on a much better path.
Thanks, Lloyd. Yeah, so there's much to be considered, and I think we need to delve a little bit more into the costs. I think we appreciate that there's obviously some gains to be had by this, and many considerations to be made, economic, etc. But coming on to the point of, and I think this is possibly where a lot of people are sitting, is in the space that Eswatini has this sort of first class or first world vision. The rest of the world seems to be moving away from this type of energy production into different aspects. And yes, there's a lot of infrastructure to be considered. There's obviously financial backing, etc., that goes into that to allow for that. But really, what is the cost that it's having on the environment? And that's really where I think a lot of people's hearts and minds are thinking. What is the cost to this? So the gains I think we've spoken to. I'd like us to flip the script a little bit and really answer some of these questions. You know, like, is it really going to increase employment, and what does that look and feel like? If we're saying that there's coal for 30 to 40 years, surely in that time we need to also think of how we transition more out of that. Also, what is the cost to, like you say, yes, infrastructure, protecting the environment, but unfortunately there seems to be sort of a lot of negative connotation about how mines actually pollute more than they sort of save or preserve in that space. And we know this, you know, you only have to drive from here to Joburg to see the big mine dumps and hear that, you know, often we feel that it's, you know, it's cheaper to just dump than to rehabilitate, right? So there's a lot of different conversation happening in that space, and I want us to jump into there, but I'd like to also allow the people in the room just to share what they're thinking, and maybe during our conversation answer some of these questions. So Claudia is just sharing our country is doomed with short-term planning and short-term economic considerations. Renewable is the only way forward for from a sustainable point of view. What are we leaving for the future generations? So again, what is the long-term impact on this supposedly sort of short, medium-term response to the need that we need? Do we know the current baseline of renewable energy sources and supply in Eswatini for businesses and various industrial sectors? What is available now other than household level usage? And what are the options and timeframes to build upon this baseline if it exists? Okay, so really understanding what currently do we know about what we are or can provide in order to have a better picture as to how this new project is going to either complement, you know, where it sits in this big picture. Okay. And then there's quite a big one from Debbie. So maybe let's go to that. When we talk cost, let's talk about a few issues. And like I said, there's the issue of poverty. We're speaking about that. Land ownership, biodiversity, water issues. Okay, we need to understand that. That's a huge one as well. And obviously emissions, you touched on it, Lloyd. Where would you like to start on this? So let's just talk to, you know, cost to the environment. I think you did touch on it. Let's go there, environmentally.
Well, I mean, environmentally, it's a bit like giving a pack of cigarettes to a lung cancer patient, unfortunately. I mean, it's probably the easiest analogy. Things have gotten more efficient, for sure, and it's in the same way that cars are less polluting now than they were 20 years ago, 50 years ago. They're still polluting, okay? So that's the point here. Clean coal is a myth. It has gotten more efficient. It has gotten slightly better. We don't have to choose it. So why greenwash something and go down that route? There's only two possible avenues down there. Either it just doesn't fulfill its lifespan and its return on investment at all, because any number of carbon tax, cost of production, cost of import, not enough supply, there's a whole range of things that could make it so. Or it does fulfill its lifespan and pollutes as much as it possibly can within that, leaving us in the same position as we're in now, where we have to unravel things, find some kind of transition into a new energy sector. Why do that again when we can do that now? You know, why are we creating certainty of jobs for one generation when we could be doing it for many generations? Okay, so it's a bit of a moot point, really, unfortunately. And I think, you know, I would just like to, I don't like reading from my phone, but it speaks to some of the questions that have been coming up on here, because I would really encourage everybody to actually read the whole Eswatini Energy Master Plan, because it shows that we do plan things as a country. We do put effort into it. It's just sometimes we don't take notice of it. And in this case, this is a government publication. Okay, this is by the Ministry of Natural Resources here. It was released 2 years ago, and it took 2 years to compile.
Right.
With experts from outside the country, but mostly compiled by experts inside the country. And it basically gave 10 possible trajectories which were mapped. One was base case, which is kind of our current trajectory, or full import, or 100% renewable energy mix. So two of the options were called forced coal. Okay, forced coal 1 and 2. One was for 300 megawatts, one is for 600 megawatts. So what's clear here is that we have, out of those 10, we have gone for the one option called forced coal 1. The name says a lot. Okay, so we've been given 10 options. The document states this: the coal technology is proved to not be economically feasible unless they are forced. The introduction of coal power limits the local exploitation of renewable energy resources fully. Apart from constraining diversification of the country's energy mix, both coal scenarios require significant amounts of capital investment. The overall investment requirements for forced coal 1 scenario is $1.3 billion, whereas the base case, which is a current trajectory, amounts to $888 million. The renewable energy option, which in the document is called limited import 3 scenario, which depicts a pathway where 100% of domestic energy is renewable, and we still are importing about 20%. So the increased share of renewable energy then brings significant benefits, and this can be achieved for just over 1 billion, so 0.3 billion less than going the coal option. So coal isn't the cheapest option, and this is government's own publication. It also concludes with some of the following: the energy landscape in 2034 will be fundamentally different than that of today. Given the long lifespan of energy infrastructure, wrong decisions now can adversely affect the energy system for decades and generations. Long-term planning is crucial to support cost-effective development of energy infrastructure, including integrating larger shares of renewable energy into the generation mix. Under the forced coal scenarios, domestic energy production is dominated by coal power generation only. These scenarios are not consistent with the government policy of diversifying energy mix. Among the scenarios that broadly meet the overall policy goals that we have outlined as government, the imported limited number 3 with 100% renewables possesses the most balanced combination of desirable policy feature. This is government itself saying that to go the coal route is more expensive and it's forced at the expense of all other options. And actually, as what we have decided and outlined in our own constitution and our own policies since 2003, is that the limited import scenario, which is 100% renewable energy locally, is the way to go. And it finishes by saying, while new coal industry will also create jobs, the coal industry suffers from negative externalities, notably mining-related death, health impacts expected as a result of pollution from coal-based generation. In addition, global decarbonization ambition makes it harder for the coal industry to be attractive at all. Many financiers see the risk of coal investments becoming stranded assets. To be compatible with government's climate change commitments under the Paris Agreement, industrialization around clean energy appears to be the only desirable way forward, and rather than betting on any new coal-based capacity. Okay. It also says that in those 2 years, they did significant stakeholder exploration around the country. All the findings of that were rejecting the options under the 2 forced coal scenarios, and that the coal options were opposed fundamentally based on adverse impacts of power generation and more ambitious renewable energy deployed. So basically, in a nutshell, what that says is that government has made a plan, put in a lot of time, energy, and money into something which gave us 10 options. Its own plan said that these are not the best options. We also did extensive stakeholder investigation, which said, yes, that's not what we want. And we've ignored it.
And gone for it.
And gone for the option that is the second worst on the list. So it's a bit like asking your friends for advice and just ignoring all of them anyway, you know, because you've already kind of made your mind up. So to me, this highlights the fact that let's not assume always that we're reacting. We do plan in this country. We put in a lot of effort and planning into this. Please read it. It's 120 pages. At least read the executive summary and the end. But in between, you'll find all the costs, the externalities, everything has been laid out by us, by government, by the universities here, by researchers from outside the country, by South Africans. It paints a very clear picture of cost, energy, environmental impacts, social impacts. It's all there. So we don't have to redo this. The options are laid out for us. The question here is, why have we gone for what is not being advised within our own government, within our own stakeholder consultations? Why are we going for an expensive, polluting option when their own document states that we can provide adequate power and baseload for peak energy within the next 10 years, and that will give us the time and investment needed to secure that beyond that point, speaking to the baseload questions that Lloyd is bringing up. It won't be resolved in 5 years, but it gives us this kind of trajectory to really work towards. And if we start now, by 2025, when we reevaluate our ESCOM plans, we will be in a much better position. If we go down the Lubhuku plan, we will waste all that money and time. We'll be in the same position that we're in now, probably even worse, because we can't then turn to ESCOM again, unfortunately.
Thanks, Dane. Lloyd, what is your response to that?
Okay. I did look at the various options that were proposed, and there's one fatal flaw in the limited import. And remember, I'm South African, but I have a genuine and a deep affection for Eswatini, and we are heavily invested in the Kobelondo project. So it is imperative for our interests that this energy conundrum be solved optimally. However, if I look at the other side of it, the other side of the coin, let's accept that Eskom is in disarray. It is now in debt to the tune of 450 billion rand. It is no longer controlled by the government. It is controlled by the financiers. That's the reality of the situation Eskom is in. Now, the limited import route suggests that only 20 or 25% of the required energy will come from Eskom until you hit a peak load requirement. So let's say you have a cloudy day where there's no wind, which happens a lot. Now, all of a sudden, that 20% requirement jumps to 90%. Now, we in the mining industry, and we've just finished negotiations with Eskom, and they were not very pleasant or happy ones. Our peak load requirement, in other words, from 5:30 in the afternoon until 8:30 in winter, our peak load cost, per kilowatt hour is now 6 rand. That's 6 rand. That is 3 times what your average household is paying for it. It is an unsustainable model, because what you've effectively done is that you're going to pay through the nose for this. I guarantee you, when Eskom comes to this and you explain to them that effectively you're shifting your base load and emergency supply onto Eskom, they're going to make you pay handsomely for the privilege. Secondly, you have no energy independence, because what it means is on a day where your renewables are not producing, everything shuts down. Now, that sounds fine, but when you're running a hospital or you're running a sawmill and all of a sudden, bang, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you shut down, the commercial impact is devastating. And when I say devastating, I'm not exaggerating. I'm not one given to hysteria or exaggeration, but it's devastating economically, because now you have to fire up your diesel generators to make up for it. Now, if you're a mine, for example, and you're using 7 MVA, well, let me tell you, the capital cost of those diesel generators is almost 100 million rand. The point of what I'm saying is that option, and I agree, coal is forced. It's unpleasant. A silly example. when you're running a beautiful restaurant with fine dining, someone is in the kitchen making it, and someone is cleaning everything when the plates are finished. You can't expect to have renewables pass off the base load onto Eskom in South Africa and expect that to be sustainable either. I think that is naive. I think Eskom are going to crank up the prices. They're going to make you, they're going to add all sorts of terms. And when it comes to the crunch, are they going to cut off Soweto or Eswatini? Well, I tell you what, that's a decision that strategically you have to make. But this is a time for hard truths. And the truth of it is that by the limited import option exposes you to even greater vulnerability to an external source. What the coal does is it gives Eswatini complete energy independence. And that there will be a price for that. And the price is that you're going to have to make sure that workers and miners are looked after, that they have proper PPE, that you have proper air extraction. Yes, there's a cost. There's an extra capex cost. I don't think the number is going to be 12 billion. I think it's going to be closer to 20 billion. But if it's done properly and you look after your workers and you look after the immediate environment, it gives Eswatini complete energy independence and cheap power. And that is where the job creation comes in. Not the job creation for the coal mine. I mean, that'll be capital intensive, yours big equipment. But your downstream users, farms, sawmills, mines, having access to cheap energy will see an influx of investment into Eswatini from elsewhere and see those businesses open. South Africa was built over the last century, was built on gold mining, working in association with coal mining, facilitated by Eskom. Cheap power built the gold mines. The gold mines built South Africa. Every road, every university, every railway line was built by gold mining. Without that industrial base, without that certainty of power at an inexpensive cost, you don't have an economy. And have a look at what's happening to the South African economy today. It's a perfect case study. It's the perfect case study, literally across your border, by collapsing its own power grid. It effectively has had massive downstream consequences for the economy, which will be with us for another decade. So what I'm saying is, then I hear you. You must promote renewables, use them as extensively as possible, but they are not going to solve your fundamental problems. To solve your fundamental problem, maybe this is the ugly stepsister of the energy industry. It certainly is, but unfortunately, it is necessary, and it is absolutely essential for the development of Eswatini, in my opinion.
Thanks, Lloyd. I think we can move to now. There's some interesting things coming through on the screen there. So if we can just move there and just share with you some of the perspectives coming in.
Yeah.
Would you like to read some of those?
Debbie says, the fact is we have a contract expiring in 2025 and it will come at a much larger cost per megawatt going forward with an untenable supply. We knew this 15 years ago, but only reacting now, hence the less than ideal solutions. Our base load, 153 megawatts and peak 230 megawatts. If the thermal power station produces 300 megawatts, solar 40 megawatts and biomass 40, are we cost competitive to export to the region, or do we assume that we will drive industrialization such that this excess will be absorbed? Given you take loans for millions of euros to build these IPPs, how will they repay these loans if government focuses on purchasing from its own thermal plant?
Nice question.
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion.
Nice one there. Thanks, Debbie. An immediate response, Lloyd, from you on that one. I know we've covered quite a few of it, but there's an interesting perspective coming in there. You know, how much time do we have? And ultimately, I like what Debbie's also saying, and it's kind of asking ourselves, is that the economy that we want to continue building? And I think that's also a big question. Is that the economy? Are the needs going to increase, and in which direction? And is that what we want to actually build? Or are we taking time to actually think and look at the future much more long term and say, what is it that we actually want? And that model possibly does not exist yet. but I think it's asking us to perhaps ask some of those critical questions. But any response you have just to what Debbie has shared with us?
Sure, it's a very good question, and it's right on point. The first thing is that the a 300 megawatt power station you can compartmentalize. Hence my suggestion that you build 50 megawatt units at a time, so you can power down and power back up in winter when you need the extra power. That's the first thing. The second thing is, by powering down those units, you can make space for your renewables. Now, yes, you're increasing the capital cost, but where Dane is right, you have to take a 20, 30-year view of this. You have to. Now, I personally believe that the gold mining industry in Eswatini will grow. I believe that the industrial base will grow. And I'm not talking big, dirty industries, but I'm talking, agriculture. Agriculture, Swaziland or Eswatini is the perfect place to enhance agriculture, but it all needs electricity. So there's no doubt in my mind that the demand for power, given the if it is available inexpensively, and yes, it can be available inexpensively, we'll see greater demand. So if the price goes down, the demand will increase. So a 300 MVA base load, which can be reduced depending on seasonality, coupled with alternate energy sources providing energy whenever it can at a reasonable cost, is going to see a significant increase in the commercial activity in Eswatini. So yeah, everything she suggested can be achieved with good management. The last question that she asked was in terms of the capex versus the cost. Well, I can tell you that at 15 billion euros and a reasonable price, say 1.20 rand per kilowatt hour for industrial users and 2 rand for domestic users, that plant will pay itself off in 10 years. So commercially, a power station works. I would just say, make sure that you have sufficient in that for an investment into the rehabilitation, and also into the ensuring that the environmental aspects are all catered for, which as I say, can be done. Dane's quite right. Coal is not clean, but it is regrettably the only option that Eswatini has to become energy independent.
Maybe if we could go to the next one just to continue the conversation. Muzi's sharing, he's read that coal-fired plants contribute 241 million metric tons of CO2. This includes 114 pounds of lead, traces of uranium, and 720 tons of carbon monoxide. Coal alone is reportedly the contributor of 72% of greenhouse gases. Why, therefore, should we go for such a killer of the environment, not just ours, but that of our future children? My other concern is that we know that in Swaziland, stealing of money from the fiscus now happens through commissioning of capital projects, where the authorities know that they will balloon the costs of construction, double or even triple, and steal money that way. Sure, Muzi. Would you like to respond, Dane?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We've seen a spate of capital expenditure projects happening, and some of them don't make sense, to put it lightly. Yeah. And this one doesn't, and we're trying to spin it as if it does. Because if we want to only focus on energy, sure, right? This is a solution,
yes,
and
sense.
It's viable and it works, and otherwise it wouldn't be one of our 10 options if it wasn't actually on the table. Right? So if we just want to talk about energy, sure, like it's a good option. But we're not just talking about energy here. Yeah. We're talking about all sorts of other things. I mean, if I was opening up a mine here, or heavy industry, sure, I would be pushing for something like this, because I'm just kicking the can down the road and I'm looking for the next 10 to 20 years. I want to know that my energy is sorted and secure, right? But I'm here for the long haul, and I don't want to be down the road. I don't have a mine to open. I don't have things that need to be relying on something like that. So there's a much bigger thing at stake here, okay? This project is kind of the equivalent of like, you know, a developer is trying to sell you a house that's like on quicksand, you know, and you're just like, you know what, I don't have a place to stay, my wife is expecting triplets, I really need somewhere, and this place is nice, got a good view, and I need a house over my head. And within 5 years it's going to be gone, you know, and they're not telling you the truth, and even you kind of know it a little bit, but you're kind of convincing yourself that, you know what, I'll deal with it when we get there.
Because it serves my immediate
I need
need.
shelter now. This is a nice enough place. It fulfills the function. It's all in working order. They've already laid the foundation. Like, let's do it. You know, that's where we're at with something like this. No one's arguing that that house is not giving you shelter or what you're looking for. But at what cost? And energy is the same here. And Muzi is right with his comments with regards to that. And in heavy construction, capital expenditure projects, mining, they don't really have a good history of empowering and uplifting the general public. Trickle-down economics doesn't work. The resources from these places are not filtering down to the rest of us. And to be honest, I'd rather have less mines and cleaner energy for us, the people, than heavy polluting baseload energy so that we can have big expenditure projects that aren't going to profit us on the ground and civil society in any meaningful way. So, you know, that's my personal standpoint with all of this. And climate change is real, it's coming, we cannot afford to build anything new. We have to even fast track what is already in process around the world and decommission projects. We're going to look like an absolute hypocrite if we do this. Eswatini has actually been a role model in creating its nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. It's had a really in-depth stakeholder-led process for the last 5 years. We're currently revising that now, okay? Right. If we undertake a project like this, we are putting at risk possible climate financing that we really need, ultimately. We're going to, at the very least, look like a hypocrite on the global stage. At worst, we're not going to get the kind of assistance that we need because we're spending our own money and getting loans on things that are directly in contradiction to what we are laying out as our own adaptation and mitigation plans in the face of climate change. This part of the world is going to be particularly hard hit. We haven't contributed to the problem that much. Let's not start now. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So we can talk energy till the cows come home, and all of these options make sense. All 10 options have viability within them. Coal makes energy. We could do it tomorrow. We will have energy. That's not the discussion, right? It's at what cost is this coming at? If you've got kids, it actually doesn't matter. Within our lifetimes, we're going to be seeing the effects coming. We think it's out of reach, but you know, we've had tropical cyclones here. If anyone remembers Thamsanqa or that kind of, it does happen, and it's going to happen more. We had droughts a few years ago. That kind of thing will speed up. Let's not accelerate the problem. Let's do everything we can to be ready for it. Let's not contribute to the problem. Let's actually create a role model of something that could be, if that comes at a cost of spending 10 years having a bit less energy than we might if we went down the coal route. Personally, I'm totally okay with that. I know that that's something people would have to make their minds up separately. But this project stands to enrich people in particular, that these kinds of big infrastructure projects do. Whoever builds this will make more money than anybody else. And the people that are investing in this, great. But, you know, for those of us that stand to be stuck with this thing for its lifetime and the effects of it long beyond that, I'm sorry, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Thanks, Dane.
Yeah, now this one is is definitely a tough one and a conversation we're going to have and keep having, both in our private spaces and as a nation. You know what I mean? To see, okay, are we doing short-term fixes which are going to give us long-term problems, like Dane is saying, in terms of the long-term effects of something like this. But then at the same time, as Lloyd is saying, at this particular point in time, it looks like this is our only option And I think maybe to summarize what Daniel Toro just asked, is it possible for us to find a solution that is going to give us clean environmental energy, keep the environment clean, but also give us a sustainable power supply? Is that even a possibility?
It's possible if we start now. It's not possible today.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, but the rate at which things are changing away from fossil fuels, those costs are just going to go up and up. And the rate at which we're moving towards both adopting and financing and researching renewable energy, it just doesn't make sense to go any direction other than where everyone is heading.
Okay.
Because within 15 years, I mean, just think of the developments we've had within 15 years, within our like adult lifetimes.
Yes.
Right, like now imagine that applied at an accelerated pace to one particular area of energy. We're going to be living in a completely different world in 2034. So it's an incremental step-based process to get to that point that Daniel was talking about. And there is no such thing as completely clean energy. Renewables come with their own host of problems.
Sure.
Right, let's not pretend otherwise. They're reliant on fossil fuels themselves to have got where they are, but they are, like any new technology, trying to break out of where they've come from. And it's kind of up to government. All it is political will. The technology is there. And if we get onto that track, and within 15 years, we will be a hell of a lot closer to, if not where we want to be. We won't be there next year, and we won't be there by 2025, unfortunately.
And I think from most of the questions, a lot of what we're being asked are there options that we have, and can we maybe spend time and resources in thinking about those options as opposed to going to the most obvious? And if COVID has taught us anything, businesses are changing their business models. Industry changing business models, the way we build the infrastructure, the way we engage and use energy. There's a whole conversation that can be had around all those areas. And maybe we're being challenged in that space. We are a small nation, we have a small population. What is it that we could possibly do to meet the needs, but also think more long term as to where we are going? So the question really is, what do we want? And it's not what we want now, but what do we want more long term? I think that's perhaps what we are being really sort of challenged to explore in this space.
Yeah, and I think just to say, like, we have a kind of moral and ethical dilemma on our hands, and we have an obligation to do what's right. I have no doubts that if this project happens, we will be looking at this, maybe watching this recording. We'll have to try and find some solace in knowing that, not just myself, but this point of view is and was the correct one. I don't know if there'll be any solace in that. I hope I'm not looking back at it at that point.
Okay.
But we really are. It is a moral obligation to not cause harm for the majority of people and life on this planet. And it really boils down to that. We can throw energy and costs and everything out the window and just look at it from that point, because it's real. It really is.
Thanks, Dane. Let's go back to the comments and then bring you in, Lloyd. There are many options beyond. Yeah, no, absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah. All right. Okay. It's all very well and good for us to be looking at 40, 50 years in the future. But right now we are sitting with a massive unemployment problem in sub-Saharan Africa, massive. Whether it's Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Eswatini, South Africa, Namibia. That has to be solved, because it's not going to be solved in 20 or 30 years' time. There's a great deal of literature on the impact of life expectancy relative to unemployment. If you're unemployed, you die younger. And that to me is a ghastly scenario. It's appalling. We have a duty. We're talking about a moral duty. We also have a moral duty to the people that are with us here and now. Now, the perception that mining, for example, and I know these numbers very well because I've been involved in it, but they don't differ very much with invested businesses that come in. Gold mining over the last century, platinum mining, yielded approximately 8% of revenue to the funders. So the funder who would go and put $1 billion into a mine like ERPM would receive anywhere from 7 to 8% of the revenue as the return on their investment. The government received about 7 or 8% in royalties and taxes. So what happened to the other $84 per 100 or the other 84%? Well, it went to pay salaries. It went to pay the wages. It went to pay the manufacturers, the transporters, the providers of reagent. It was plowed back into the economy. So when the Boilermaker got paid his salary check, he went and paid the school fees for his kids, or went and bought a TV, and the TV salesman bought a kettle, and so on. The multiplier effect of mining is massive. The beneficiary of mining and of industry and new businesses coming in is to the economy. Yes, the shareholders are entitled to a reward, and many of them represent pension funds. They're entitled to it. They've taken the risk. They should get a return. Otherwise, if that was not implemented, you would not be able to retire when you're 65. So the major beneficiary of investment into Eswatini will be the country itself. And this is where I see a big disconnect. Yes, we have to preserve our environment for future generations, but they're not going to be future generations if the current generation is fundamentally unemployed and has no future outcome. All right, to be sitting and having been unemployed for 4 or 5 years because your business that you worked in is closed down is devastating. All right, it has a huge impact from a societal perspective. We all know that. So that we have to counterbalance, and we can, the environmental impact of what we do now versus job creation and sustaining an economy, because fundamentally, and this is at one of the public participation sessions, there's an inclination of a community not to have projects in their own backyard, yet they still want free education, free medical treatment, free varsity. Somewhere, someone has to pay the piper. Somewhere, you have to have an economy that can fulfill the dreams and aspirations of the current and the future generation. I'm pointing out, and I feel that the evidence backs me on this one. If you are creating a business and you have access to cheap, reliable power, you are far more inclined to make the capital investment into that business, whether it's agriculture or mining or whatever it is. That business creates jobs. Yes, you will make a profit out of this business, otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. But the bulk of the benefit of that goes to the nation, it goes to the tax man, it goes to the employees, and we mustn't lose sight of that. So I'm suggesting that what Eswatini should do is it should place its reliance on its base load and rely upon these very environmentally competent people to then make sure that the impact of that is limited as much as possible, and at the same time embrace alternative energies so that you can build your base load and your peak load capacity and grow your economy. Without that power station, the Eswatini economy does not grow. It's going to take 10, 15, 20 years for renewables to do the job. You've got the coal, you can start construction. By the time, I reckon you can build this power station in 5 years. Just by the time that Eskom starts to put the hammer down on the pricing that you have to pay. So I hear the arguments. I believe that one has to be cautious, one has to be cognizant of future generations and making sure that the environmental impacts are reduced, but you have to have your base load to build your economy. And the only place that's going to come from and give you energy independence is from this coal-fired power station, I'm afraid. It's the reality of it.
Lloyd, I think though, there's, what keeps coming up is this question of dependency, and where we put it, where we place it, and how we build to increase it or to reduce it in all spheres. And just to share, guys, for those of us who have been in Eswatini, we've seen projects, and yes, we talked about investment, it was great, but it didn't add value into the communities. We didn't see more clinics, we didn't see schools being built, we saw nothing. In actual fact, it was extraction. And it didn't serve our community. So in theory, yes, it's great, and all those are potentials and possibilities. Do they actually play out in the real? And I think this is also where we need to really see proof that this is what potentially could happen, and have a long-term plan that meets both the need, but also looks at a phased approach, and something that looks towards moving away from this and really preserving not only human life, but the environment. I just want to come back to some comments here. There are many options beyond coal. This is Liliana, and to suggest coal is the only option is simply incorrect and incredibly dangerous. Renewables are diverse, waste to energy, and others which could be used to provide the base load or to be used above energy imports while transitioning. To simply look at how to supply energy to mines and industrial agriculture is also very problematic, and to continue dependence on extractive industries which are destructive on every level and will keep countries of the South indebted and in poverty. Mandla says, it seems that the coal thermal plant is protecting the interests of mining as a high priority. I think diesel generators and limited import as part of the base load will be easier to dismantle and come at a lower cost when the environment is properly considered in a global setting of the climate crisis. Let's try create an economy that works with the environment. Ecotourism and agriculture, for example. Okay, with the level of corruption that we have, it will be impossible to do rehabilitation and environmental controls that Lloyd talks about. And again, we are disregarding the future of our children based on short-term economic gain for a few greedy companies and government. Okay, and so a lot of these comments in the same. Mining perhaps is the worst. Some are feeling what Lloyd is saying is just the brainwashed version from mining companies. They take all the profit from the countries they bleed, no profit for miners besides the strict minimum for survival. And health issues, of course, we know that those are always risk. Okay, what is the return on investment for green options of power? I think, Mandla, we've possibly just alluded to some of those in this discussion, so I hope maybe that question has somehow been spoken to. It comes in terms of money, but it also comes at an uncountable benefit in terms of ecosystems and environmental gains that will continue to pay forever. Okay, so ultimately we see that there's a lot of perspective on this, as far as we all understand that there's a need that needs to be met. The way in which we go about it is, I think, what people are challenging. Can we option think about it? Can we look at our economy currently and look at how we change that model? Can we look at how our dependency is on the current grids? Can we look at, and like you mentioned, Lloyd, a lot comes up with Eskom. Eskom itself is relooking at its model and how it generates and provides power. So, we can see that there is certainly movement in the space, that's for sure. And there's some very strong opinions and strong research on both sides of the camp. Yeah. But hopefully what we've done, ladies and gents, today is with Lloyd and with Dane, been able to speak to this from the different perspectives, to provide information, and to also redirect you to go and read on some of these documents that are available. And it's just all in the interest to make a more informed decision. Yeah. This is something that impacts every one of us, and very often we're not engaged in these discussions, right? And somehow this has come up, and what we really want to do is invite people to be engaged. At every level in this project, and to really make your own informed decision, and to also discuss it with others so that we can educate and share this information. But yeah, I think it's just to say, Lloyd, I'd like to hand over to you just as we close the session down. Unfortunately, this brings us to the end of this Connect. It's obviously a conversation that needs to continue happening, and it will. I think we can very confidently say that. But maybe just very quickly, what is your last sort of parting message, note that you would like to say? Then we'll hand over to you, Dane, and close the session down. But over to you, Lloyd.
Okay. There's always a great deal of emotion around mining, and we've been well acquainted with it for the last 20 years, and many of these viewpoints are completely valid. The problem though is that there's a misconception with the amount of taxation levied on mining companies, with the input costs that are levied on mining companies. It is imperative, if there's one task that I have today, it's to convey that mining benefits, I'm talking commercially, the primary beneficiaries are the let's call it the country. But if the government doesn't get taxation, if the investors do not get a return, if the staff are not properly paid, if your suppliers are not properly paid, it will fail. What I'm saying is a successful mine actually caters to the needs of everybody. Now, what has happened, and I acknowledge this, is that mining has in the past, in the absence of environmental oversight, overstepped the mark. I'm not in any way disputing that. And that is why I've been hammering on this point, that we have in this new environment. We have a much better system of oversight, and provided the administration of the environmental components is properly done and paid for, the harm caused by mining can be significantly mitigated. That's very important. But fundamentally, somewhere, somehow, someone has to pay for the universities. Someone has to pay for the hospitals. Someone has to pay for the kids to go to school. Someone has to pay for your retirement. And that comes from wealth creation. Tourism is not wealth creation. That's the transfer of funds from someone to someone else. Yes, for Eswatini, that's fine. But as we've seen, you have something like COVID, or you have another place that emerges, and all of a sudden, that's not true wealth creation. Wealth creation, for example, is agriculture or mining. And they're not rent-seeking industries because of what they generate. The issue, though, is the control of their performance. If those operations are controlled, then you are in a far, far better position. You have the best of both worlds. And that's what I'm suggesting. Have the best of both worlds. Now, in conclusion, let me say this. I would love not to see the power station there. I really would. I'm saying there's no option to it. If Eswatini wishes to achieve energy independence and sustain itself for the next 10 years until alternate energy becomes far more conducive to base loading, that's what they have to do. I'm afraid that's the reality of it. And I've heard the arguments. I've listened to them. I've understood them. I've read all of the opinion pieces. But fundamentally, I do not believe Eswatini has a choice. But in mitigation, make sure that the environmental controls are in place and do it smartly, do it cleverly. And I believe that it will actually satisfy the requirements of all the interested and affected parties.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. Thanks for agreeing to be on the panel.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And just putting your time aside to be on the show with us. Thank you very much. And we wish you well and good health. Stay safe. The numbers seem to be going up.
Yeah.
Okay. Dane, over to you.
Thank you very much.
Lloyd obviously spoke about wealth. In the same sentence, we put health. Health and wealth, and even the way we define those things has changed. We say if and can. Those are obviously possibilities. There's no guarantee. Mm-hmm. From your perspective, what would you like to say just to conclude this particular session, not the discussion, of course, because as we said, this is going to keep being spoken about for sure.
Of course, yeah, and we're going to have to keep talking about it. And getting people engaged in their own future instead of waiting for some unknown entity to make these decisions for us. So I think, I understand totally Lloyd's point of view. It makes sense coming from his point of view. And I think since the Industrial Revolution, we have created a lot of wealth and growth in the world, an enormous amount. But it's concentrated at the top and it's left most people behind, let's be honest. Continuing on that trajectory, and it's all been fueled by fossil fuels. Continuing on that trajectory is not going to change anything. Expecting different results from the same approach is madness, right? So let's not delude ourselves into thinking that this is anything more than an approach to try and get quick fixes for heavy industry here and now. If we really had the interests of long-term people and citizens, the models would be completely different. And in fact, they have to be. We need a complete shift. And we're at a juncture now where we can do that. A lot of the world is at a point where they're trying to think of what is termed a just transition. So how to transition away from a reliance on fossil fuel, because they have industry investment jobs that are stuck in this and that need to be changed into something else. We're not at that point. We don't have that transition to make. We have a decision to make of where we're going. Let's not make a decision that just kicks that can down and then we have to transition. What is the point in that? It doesn't make any sense. If there are countries out there that are hitting now, this year, 100% renewable power, why can't we do that? That should be our goal, honestly. Renewable energy jobs are one of the fastest growing in the world. Fossil fuel jobs are one of the fastest declining and the most at risk. So that doesn't hold true. And if it's really about the interest of bringing up as many as we can, then let's go for the options that inherently bring that to the fore. Just trying to provide energy to heavy industry, whether it's industrial mining, industrial agriculture, is just going through the same one-track line of development that will enrich a tiny portion of people in this country or from outside and leave the rest of us in the lurch again, like every single other big project we've had. Let's not expect this to be any different. We have the solutions. Please go and read the Energy Master Plan. It's got them all lined up in there. It's not explicitly saying which one is the best. It's just clearly stating that coal is really not where we should be heading. And I think that that's quite interesting that government has commissioned, written and published such a thing and is then going against its own kind of advice. And I think if we follow the money and follow the decision making, you come to probably some pretty interesting other discussions. So yeah, I think that's where I'd like to end. It's just that, you know, we really are at a critical juncture now, so let's not make the wrong mistake.
Yeah. Thanks, Dane. It's been great having you. Thanks for agreeing to come onto the panel. I think this is a very important discussion and we need to keep having it, keep engaged, keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
I've certainly learned a lot from the session, so thank you so much to our panel. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, just like tons and tons of potent information, especially this is stuff that we need to engage with as a nation. This is not about the government or the mining companies or the environmentalists. This is everybody's concern, everybody's issue. And I think just to go back to something that Lloyd said, yes, we do have an obligation to the future generation, but we also have an obligation to the current generation. So we need to make the best possible decision, the better good for the greatest number. At the end of the day, that's what it's going to come down to. So thank you to everyone that tuned in. Lloyd, you've been a great sport. Dane, my main man, we appreciate you so much. To the guys that came through on the comment section, just giving us their opinion as well. You guys have been absolutely amazing. But like Shelley said, this is just a part of the conversation, or rather just a platform of a part of the conversation. We definitely need to take it up further beyond this point and just keep talking about it and come up with the best possible option.
Thank you, Eswatini, for showing up. We've got a lot of information on our sides now. Let's keep the conversation going. I love what it says. We have a decision to make, and the quality of that decision will really tell us where our hearts and minds are.
Yeah.
And that's the truth of the matter. Can we option think around these things? Absolutely. Is there potential and possibility? Yes. Can we be a flagship? Yes. But at the end of the day, we ask and answer one question. What do we want? And that's what we need to answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on that note. Thank you so much, guys, for showing up. Let's keep the conversation going. It is the end of the year, but keep connected. We're going to be sharing some info with you. Stay safe out there, please. Stay safe. And we'll see you soon.
Absolutely.
Pinky
Nyandoro in the background. Salutes. Daniel Toro, the master, for another brilliant live stream. Thank you. And to the Pacific Institute team for allowing us to use their premises. It's been such a pleasure. Like Shelley said, keep safe. We will see you on the next episode of The Connect. Salute.